Hello, cyberspace. This is Katelyn Lamb here representing the group on minority rights. I'm with Robert, Aminata, and Kendra, and we are going to be presenting, or I guess I'm going to be reading our presentation about immigration. To get started, we just thought we'd kind of explain. You probably know what immigration is, but here's the formal definition: is to enter and usually become established, especially to come into a country of which one is not a native for permanent residence. So we just thought it would be good to start off with a general idea of what it is that we're going to be talking about. This is just an overview of how we kind of divided what we're discussing, and we have 3 time periods that we've kind of examined immigration in, and then those are just the people who did the research for those time periods. Basically, we felt that immigration was a really important aspect of minority rights. As immigrants come from other countries into this country, it changes the demographics of America's national identity and their makeup. And so this graph kind of just shows how relevant this issue has been for decades, from the 1820s even to, and this only goes to 1980, but even up till now. I'm sure you guys are familiar with different aspects of immigration law or policy and the kind of effect that that's having even today. So as you can see from this figure, immigration is a really relevant and influential topic. Okay, so to get started, from 1865 to 1900 is kind of the first period of immigration we're going to be looking at. So in the mid-1800s, a lot of Northern and Western Europeans, people from England, Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, arrived in America, and then more in the latter half of the middle, if that makes sense, of the 19th century was a high increase of Chinese immigrants who came mostly to the West Coast and were working in areas such as railroads or other kind of labor jobs. And then in the last part of the 19th century, a lot of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europeans arrived. People from places like Italy or Poland, Russia, Austria, Greece, Turkey, and Syria. So that's kind of an overview of who came in that period. Why people came? Well, obviously people usually immigrate because there's something they want to be involved in, or there's something they're trying to get away from. So a hope for a better life. People came to the U.S. in this time in search of improvement, and some groups like the Irish fled poverty and famine. Other groups such as Jews from Eastern Europe, they sought freedom from religious persecution. Generally, other issues such as overpopulation, disease, or unemployment caused people to leave their native countries. Immigrants were drawn to America also by the economic opportunities produced by industrialization and urbanization, which we've studied, how that just created an economic boom and a lot of job and labor opportunities. Between 1880 and 1920 alone, about 20 million immigrants arrived in the U.S., so this was a time when industrialization was really peaking, and that really had a significant effect on the numbers of people arriving to the U.S. So in this time period, immigrant communities were very urban. 2/3 of immigrants lived in cities, and that's mostly due to, like I said, their work with industry. The urban growth created challenges of crowded living conditions, poor sanitation, and poverty. So they weren't just coming to the U.S. and living in white picket fence suburban houses. It was, and I know we studied that in our book too. We read excerpts about tenant apartments and how those conditions were unacceptable and unhealthy and even dangerous at times. But as far as socially and relationally, a lot of immigrants attempting to recreate communities of their homelands, they would have family and neighborhood support and would often live in the same neighborhoods as other people from their same country of origin. They also held on to a lot of religious and traditional holidays or observations, just to kind of create that network and feeling of connection in a new place. The American experience for these immigrants was maybe not what most of them had anticipated. the American dream and the hope for kind of economic opportunity and equality that brought a lot of people to the U.S. proved to be pretty hard to come by. Like I've mentioned, many individuals worked in factories. For example, in 1870 alone, 2/3 of all manufacturing jobs were filled by foreigners. And not that that is necessarily a problem, but most of those jobs were in poor conditions and were paid very minimal wages. So that created a difficult lifestyle for these people newly arrived to the U.S. In addition to that, there was racism and language barriers, religious prejudice, or economic class prejudice that kind of prevented a lot of immigrants from being fully integrated into American society. So the American experience was not as idealistic as I think we often picture. And not only was it difficult for immigrants to respond to their new life in America, it was difficult for a country to respond to these new waves of people from foreign parts. In this time, a lot of anti-immigration sentiment arose. This kind of culminated in the 1890s. There was the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese laborers from coming to America. This occurred after the Chinese immigrants had been blamed for a decrease in wages on the West Coast, and so the government just said, we're going to outlaw any more immigration from that in the hopes that all wages would rise or there would be more jobs, etc. And there was also a movement called the Purity Crusades, and this arose out of kind of a distrust of immigrants, and it sought to not exclude them like the Chinese Exclusion Act, but to reform the people who are already here and to kind of align them to middle-class beliefs and cultures and lifestyles of, quote, normal Americans. Also during this time period, President Harrison established Ellis Island, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, and it served as an official immigration center. This is a really iconic symbol of what it meant to come to America, at least for most of the people coming via New York from the East. And between 1892 and 1954, the island saw over 12 million immigrants enter America, which is a huge number. But basically, the effect of this period of massive immigration in the U.S. was a really altered national demographic. Urban areas especially were now home to a wide variety of ethnicities, religions, and cultures. So this period of immigration helped create America's identity as the melting pot of the world. It really solidified the diverse traditions and cultures that are really still a part of the U.S. today. So that's kind of the long-term effect it has had on the country. And then from 1900 to 1950, we continued to have immigration. There was a diverse mix of immigrants that entered the United States. Most immigrants, though, came from Europe, Asia, Africa, and Mexico. So the kind of Mexican immigration, which is something newer from this time period. The United States, concerned with the influx of immigrants, passed several anti-immigration laws during 1900 to 1950. These laws were aimed at weeding out the, quote, unjust, quote, to preserve Protestant cultures from being watered down by immigrants. One of the first laws of this kind was the Immigration Act of 1917. So kind of like the Purity Crusades, this was a movement to purify, for lack of a better word, people coming to immigrate. Other laws concerning immigration tweaked to exclude certain racial classes from entering the United States. The rise in immigration, again, following World War I, would lead to the creation of the Emergency Immigration Act of 1921 and the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924. These, again, were coming to restrict the number of immigrants coming into the United States after the war. And you guys can read different aspects of those. So the effects of these immigration laws, one of the effects of these laws was a reduction in immigration, obviously, based on racial or cultural backgrounds. Immigrants coming from Northern or Western Europe were favored over any other immigrant because they shared similar beliefs of the native Protestant cultures. Eastern and Southern European numbers dropped, as well as Asian immigrants. The Asians were hit the hardest and saw their numbers reduced severely. And maybe some of you guys know about, after World War II, kind of the effect that war and conflict with Japan had on Asian immigrants, or people of Asian heritage who had lived in the United States for generations still. So that had something to do with that as well. The Great Depression and both world wars would drastically affect immigration in the United States. During World War I, immigration was virtually non-existent. Only after the war would immigration numbers climb up again. So the incoming rate of immigration declined during the Great Depression, followed World War I due to bleak economic conditions, as well as immigration laws in the United States. Anti-sentiment of immigrants by native residents greatly rose because they were most often blamed for the lack of employment. So again, that's just like the Chinese Exclusion Act, where immigrants are blamed for a lot of the problems in the United States just because they aren't the majority, or they're new, or have different beliefs or lifestyles. So that is kind of a look at immigration up to World War II. This is